Welcome to It Tastes Like Burning, a completely nonsensical podcast about volunteer fire departments with overrated opinions and completely unrelated facts and or opinions that probably shouldn't be followed or advised, but you're more than welcome to laugh at.
I'm Jesse,
I'm Matt
and thanks for tuning into our podcast. We hope
for
it's as fun for you as it is for us.
Theoretically.
Thanks for tuning in to the Taste Like Burning podcast with Jesse and Matt. Being episode 1, series 1, number 1, we thought we'd give you a little introduction to who we are. So I'm Jesse. I started in the fire service in 1999 and have been a member of a volunteer fire department since. Had a few sabbaticals here and there and a leave or two during that time, but mainly been continuous member of one or more departments throughout that entire time. I've also worked as a EMS worker. Spent 16 years working EMS as a paid EMS professional, and hold a few trades licenses and own a business, and just kind of living my life and dedicated myself to this. This is one of those things that I felt like I was good at and wanted to pursue, and have made a go at it. I've served as every position that you can possibly serve in a volunteer fire department, from the rookie to the chief and back to the rookie, and currently I sit as a training captain. I've been a training captain a few times in the history of my career, and go from there. But it's been a blast, and I look forward to sharing some of that knowledge and things that I've picked up over the last 20 plus years, and share that with the world and see if it doesn't help somebody.
Excellent. Obviously, I'm Matt. So I started truly volunteering on a fire department in 2010. I had the unique luxury of just job availability to be able to be exceedingly active on a very busy organization. Started off as a training lieutenant, but I even think I was a gopher before that for a few years. Became training lieutenant, then moved up to training captain, operations captain, station captain, been active on our pension boards and also in our state regulatory agency for certifying volunteers through SFFMA in our, I think it's our district office as vice chair there. And generally, I've always been a lot more involved on the training side, and a lot of that also comes from my career too. Training's just something that I gravitate to. But guess what was that now? 2 years ago now, I decided to run as chief, and skipped assistant chief, but I've been chief here for quite a while. It feels like quite a while, starting with COVID and then bouncing through the rest of COVID. It's quite a challenge starting there.
Yeah, no, the cards are stacked against you for a start point there. I think you had a few months before that really wound up, and my memory serves me. You kind of had a couple months to get your feet wet, and then it was off to the races, a whole new world.
I truly think our saving grace in COVID, a lot of it had to do with the state that we're in Texas. And it doesn't really matter what my personal opinions are of all the regulations and recommendations and mandates. The fact of the matter is that our community, state, region, district, county, across the board, Texas pretty much broke the gate right away and kind of just decided this is the path that we're taking on it. And so where my one lucky thing in all of that is that, of course, COVID truly starts in February, has a major upswing in March, and I mean in May of 2020, it was pretty much on a downhill swing from a political point of view in our area and even in our state. So that was the one benefit that I had is that I didn't have near the lockdown period. I didn't have near the mandate period, not near the social scare that a lot of other departments had to deal with. And it didn't matter if, again, your opinion on the mandates didn't matter. You get to deal with the public perception of what you're expected to be doing. And that was one thing that we got very lucky with. Obviously, you had to wear masks and gloves and decon trucks, but the community's expectation of what they were wanting from the fire departments at that time and how long they were expected to perform in that perceived manner was not nearly as long as other organizations, let's say like Oregon.
For sure. And one of the things I noticed during all that time, and despite all the challenges that were there with it, we did have the decrease in call volume there at the initial beginning of all the COVID things, but that quickly turned back around into higher volume. And at that point in time, I was the EMS coordinator here, I believe, is what my position was, and it was definitely something we had to consider for that.
Yeah, I think we could actually do probably one whole. We were before we started this podcast, we came up with ideas, themes, topics, on and on, and this wasn't something that we had kind of settled on. We just kind of jumped in, and that's where we landed to start out. I literally think we could talk the entire time, not about policies or mandates or anything, but just a volunteer fire department's kind of catch-22 when you just get that dumped in your lap, because the chances are you are not going to have the resources that, let's say, New York or LA or Houston or Chicago is going to necessarily have. They don't have the answers, but they have the resources that you don't. And we could make an entire podcast just strictly about that.
Yeah, and maybe this is it. Maybe we just keep rolling with this topic, because it is one of those things, and it challenged a lot of people with what do you do? What do you do when one of your members was positive, COVID positive in those early stages, and what does that mean for the rest of your membership? And none of us knew at that point in time really how transmissible or any of those things, because we knew nothing. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, and how do you still maintain service, because that's your ultimate responsibility, is maintain the service for the public.
I think right out of the gate, since we'll just segue to this and make this the topic.
Yeah.
So it's obviously news for, we'll call it 3 weeks. Okay. Then the first cases pop up in the U.S. They get sick. Then you have your first reported death. More people get sick. And then from there, you just had this cascading wave of social pressure, social media reaction. The current political environment in the U.S. was very, very reactionary. And all of a sudden, places that were liberal, conservative, everyone was kind of expecting some sort of magic answer. And at the very beginning of that, there was no answer. So as our area progressed with this, the first thing that happened was a lockdown before the nationwide lockdown. And that actually happened in this area. And people did it from a regional area. And then you talk about the fire department. Well, one of the bread and butter operations of my organization is people hanging out at the station. And I have the benefit of people that arguably should have many other things going on in their life, or should focus on things that are perhaps more important in their life, but they're fire junkies and they enjoy being here and everything that offers. And the issue is that right out of the gate, you're going to close down this station, and all of a sudden, your immediate ability to respond to the community is technically threatened because now the core essence of your response is no longer available as a tool in your responding tool chest because you don't have people at the stations anymore. And as it progressed, you went into this really uneasy sense of what calls do you go to? What PPE do you wear? How are you supposed to wear it? Can you reuse it? And if our organization was struggling out of the gate with the PPE problem, so was everyone else nationwide. And who would have ever thought that a box of M95 masks would have actually been something that you'd have been considering paying hundreds of dollars for at one point? There for the first month and a half, our first masks that we had were the masks that I'd taken from my wood shop.
Yeah.
That's what we had.
Yeah, because in 2018 you were throwing them away because they had a little dust on them, and then all of a sudden that becomes the hot commodity that you have to even function. So it just that one little change, and yes, we have had masks, surgical masks, and gloves, and all this stuff because we do run first response for medical calls. We had a supply of that on hand, but some of those things, gloves. Essentially, every time you get out of the truck, there's a pair of gloves on. But prior to COVID, there wasn't a mask. There wasn't a gown. There was some gowns in a OB kit for delivering a baby. There's two of those in there. But beyond that, you don't have just stores of all this stuff, and it has to come from somewhere. And when everybody's rushing out to buy it all at once, here you are without the tools in the toolbox.
And again, the public messaging was because you had two fronts, arguably three. You had one that originally came from the government, and they just basically just went, and then you had the national media, and they were just giving you statistics that didn't exist, and I'll argue that. It's really hard to report that you have a national pandemic going on at the time when there's only, 300 cases reported in the U.S. and one death. Now, obviously, it turned into something, and I'm not trying to downplay that, but it adds to hysteria. And if we're struggling getting masks and gloves and PPE, so are all the other organizations around us. And it's compounded by the fact that you had the general public causing a crushing wave into all of the supply chain, top to bottom. And it was literally impossible to be able to get any of that, much less, questions on contact surfaces, because that was a big deal. Is how long does COVID exist on a contact surface? So we set up a cleaning schedule. We've already barred everyone from going to the stations. We've significantly restricted the amount of people that are going on calls. We're extremely limiting our PPE use. So now you're having to dictate what calls you're actually going to be responding to with your local medical agency. And then it gets compounded by the fact that there's no resources, there's no supplies. Everyone is caught with their proverbial pants down. And okay, fine, we're going to clean everything daily, hourly, monthly, weekly. Oh my God, there's no Clorox. How do you clean it now? And that I could say that was probably the biggest problem coming through it is that it took your entire response, just everything, protocols, whatever, just throw it out the door. Because even if you had the people, now the problem is did your people actually want to go to a medical call where someone had the sniffles? Because at that time, until dispatch could truly get their pulse and finger on kind of like how to tone it out, everything was toned out as hot. Well, if you're a 65-year-old man or woman and your spouse at home's a type 2 diabetic with it's an asthmatic, you're not going on these calls. There's no reason to expose yourself to that.
Yeah, and it played out different and all over the place. During that time I took a job, part-time job working EMS on halfway across the state, and in preparation for this massive call wave that was going to happen. And I did, I don't know, 2-3 months of traveling out there and taking 48-hour shifts and as a secondary unit. And I don't know, 3 months I ran 10 calls. So that huge wave that was expected initially didn't happen. I actually believe that we saw a decrease, and I think that decrease was probably due to fear. People didn't want that person-to-person contact. They sucked it up and figured out what to do on their own, or they definitely didn't want to go to the hospital because that's the scary place where all the people are going to die. So they just avoided that altogether.
Right, and that also gets compounded by, I mean, I know of several, and we're talking gigantic medicals, strokes, heart attacks, broken limbs. They won't go to the hospital. There was a guy in our area that died of gangrene.
Out of fear of going to the hospital.
Out of the fear of going to the hospital. You got to think about that for a second. Died at home from gangrene. That's not a smooth transition. That's not a real pleasant thing to ever experience. And I mean that was the public perception of it. And in our community that was a significant problem for a lot more than just a month or two. That went on for probably close to a year and a half. And then it gets compounded by these rolling variant waves, Delta and Omicron, and whoever knows what else is coming down the pike.
Yeah, it's far from over. I think this is, status situation normal, status unknown kind of deal. Like it's gonna be part of our lives for the rest of our lives as far as COVID, and it's gonna be something that we're gonna have to deal with in some aspects. What that changes into or does or evolves into, who knows? It's not going away, but the consequences have seemed to reduce significantly, and some of that fear has subsided, at least generally in our area, of that fear of the hospital, fear of the EMS, and some of that. Now we still have COVID positive calls pretty regular. I mean, that's a normal thing that happens, but some of that fear is waned over time.
Yeah, I mean, probably one of the more incredible things is whenever they came out with the boosters, and I had gone down there, and one of the crazier things that I saw there, and I didn't think about it from this aspect just because of my age. I'm only 38. And truthfully, I don't have any pre-comorbidities, and health is good. And frankly, I was not that concerned about COVID if I caught it. And as I got my first vaccination, and because we're on the fire department, we were able to get our first rounds pretty quick. I got mine in February. And I was shocked and truly surprised that how many people in the community had actually truly isolated for how long. Most of the people that were in there, and this was a very large community-driven event. They were doing thousands of shots over the very small amount of time. And, I mean, you'd had people that had been isolating at home for well over a year. And, just the impact that it had on them. Literally, there was people weeping after they had their shot because they could finally go see their family. And I'm not talking about 20-year-olds here. I'm talking, truly older geriatrics, been at home and doing due diligence with their isolation for an incredibly long time. And I guess it's just basic naivety on my part. I knew it, but I didn't consider it. And it was something that also had a significant community impact because after that round of vaccinations coasted through our county, you did start to actually see more and more people out. And again, that was kind of compounded by the state that we live in also. Week by week, month by month, it's going to change the policies that you have at the fire station. Because the fact of the matter is that if you're running 10, 15, 20 calls a day, that's going to cause people to be in the building.
For
And
sure.
you're going to have to come up with a whole new scheme of decontamination and PPE and basically awareness and self-preservation.
Yeah, and if I remember right, and my memory's not the greatest in the world. I remember, you had that decrease in the medical calls, you had that decrease in traffic accidents because people weren't out and about, but we did have an uptick in structure fires, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a great big increase, but it was above the norm. Is that what my memory's telling me?
Yeah, yeah, no, it's and to not segue, it's along the same lines, but so our department's basic response to this is again, so before all this happened, we had a very active firehouse community. We have a lot of people in the stations. We have a lot of people hanging out. It causes multiple trucks, multiple people on scene for whatever call we have. COVID happens. Our department policies was to go to a response per tone only, limiting, depending on the call, limiting the amount of people responding, limiting the apparatus en route, canceling other units en route, and also just approaching our older members and telling them there's nothing wrong if you can't come in right now. There's nothing wrong with focusing on your health right now. And if we don't see you in 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever, that's fine. It's, again, at the end of the day, you're volunteer.
You get that pass.
Yeah, it's not a death march. It's, you got to do what you got to do to take care of you. And I'm trying to remember how long that we had the firehouse restriction. I want to say until about July.
I think it was a little longer than that. I think it was into the fall pretty far before it kind of opened up a little bit. I think we kind of the ebb and flow in that first wave had kind of come and passed, and it was a little less. The case numbers were down, and then it was still, though, clean the place, be responsible, all that kind of stuff that was going on.
Deconning trucks and equipment anytime it went on a specific call, or if you even thought you had a random exposure, same thing, decon yourself, your tools, your equipment, the apparatus, the building. And kudos to our guys for that. That wasn't a problem. People just did it. Thank Christ. We did, I want to say it was in Delta. I might be wrong about that, though. That may have been at the end of 2020. When was Delta? 2020, right?
No, that would have been 2021.
Okay, so towards the end of 2020, we'll call it late summer, maybe early fall, we did have one Delta, or not, I said Delta again. We did have one COVID run through the fire station. I know the particular call that it was on because I was one of 14 people that actually didn't get it. I think there was one other person. And we had 12 people down for 2 weeks. And then, of course, their symptoms ran the gamut. Some people were fine in 12 minutes, and other people were sick for 12 days. But that's the only true Delta run that we ever had in the organization, where we had we'll just call it a bad hygiene on a call and bad practices, and it was a fire alarm is what it was. And it was we were about 14 of us in an attic trying to chase down where it was a big building, trying to chase down where this specific spot was at. and we all ended up going through the same attic access. Outside of that, people were on different apparatus, different stations, different crews, but the one commonality on that entire thing was the building and the point of entry into the attic. Outside of that, I don't know of any of our membership that truly got scary sick off of it. I know no one went to the hospital. I do know of one guy in a neighboring department, mutual aid department. That cat got sick.
Yeah,
That
for a
that
long
guy,
time.
Yeah, that guy was really, really messed up. And he's alive now, but I mean we're well outside of a year of him.
And better's debatable.
Yeah, and he was, and I think that's one thing that's always kind of aggravated me about the COVID discussion. There were some people that got truly catastrophically sick off of this, and they maybe didn't die, but it was life altering for them. And I think that consideration gets forgotten sometimes in these discussions. And I'll follow that up by saying that I don't think that we need to be running calls in iron lungs and swimming in Lysol before and after a call, but do understand that there are people that aren't 85, that aren't 600 pounds, and some of them are under 30, and they get sick, and they get incredibly sick. And just because there's not a lot of them, we can't just completely write it off as just saying it's the flu.
Yeah. Well, and generally we're a group of people that are accepting of a certain amount of risk anyway, just by the nature of what we do. So, you know, that the thought that any risk is too much is not necessarily compatible with what we do on a daily basis. I mean, there's risks to, and probably the greatest risk is just getting to the call.
Yeah, on any average
given
day. Yeah.
Any given day. So we accept a little more risk probably than the average person, and for sure more than grandma, just because of who we are and what we do. One of the things that I noticed that one of those consequences of all that was we had a rough year of training. The inability to have those group gatherings and training in that group setting, which is for any department, but especially a volunteer fire department, that's important because that's where we learn each other's capabilities. We get on the same page about what we're doing, and we did our best to work around all that and do some, smaller scale stuff and things that weren't with large groups, but it had an effect, and it did hurt the overall function of things for a while because there was a little less cohesion there that we get from that team building side of training.
Yeah, well, and particularly, I know you saw this a handful of times you ran command or being an officer, and I definitely saw it running command or being an officer or an engineer. At the beginning of this, I said that, I have the benefit of a bunch of young people. Well, that also means that a bunch of young people need a bunch of training. And I'm not saying that hands-on time on a scene is not incredibly valuable, but it also makes it incredibly hard to truly be able to critique someone and get them to break bad habits through good training. Because it's one thing to see someone screw up, go over there, give them the correction. But if you don't have the ability to run them through training and reinforce the correction, it's just going to happen again. And then you compound that by the entirety of the department basically still having their spots, because that's how young my department was at the time. And it is training's vital there. And I'm not saying training's not incredibly vital at all times, at any time. But when you truly don't have the ability to do hands-on training on a hands-on skill, and probably the best analogy I can use for this is give someone a book on how to fly 747 and then go expect them to fly it.
Yeah, good luck.
Good luck. Because that's about what you're going to get from it. And Firefighting, at least the way I look at it, is a little more than hose dragging and just a little bit more than putting the wet stuff on the red stuff. Because if that's your real attitude towards it, I guarantee you there's some other doors you can open up there.
Yeah, there's and Pandora's box of stuff there to unpack. And with that training deal, we have new people come in all the time, and that's a continual process that happens basically every month. And most of those people in that first 6 months of that probationary period, they attend a rookie academy that we host in house, and we do that a couple times a year. Well, there was a year hole in that schedule where that rookie academy didn't happen. Basically, for it wasn't quite a year; it was probably 10 months that there was a break in that, and you saw it with those guys that didn't get that intense amount of hands-on training. That they still got the didactic part, the book learning part of it, because that was easy enough to do in that removed scenario. But that school has a lot to do with not just our department, but with neighboring departments utilize that for bringing their people up to speed in that initial part, and they all lost it. We all lost it.
Oh yeah, no, it directly reflected. I mean, calls were still made, fires were put out, medicals were responded to, CPR was administered, and patients were saved. But the problem is that you're even leaning harder on your more veteran membership, who's tentatively hesitant about making calls because of the personal risk that they were willing to take those first couple of months and quarters and year. And it's a compounding factor. Another thing I kind of want to segue into is kind of the administrative side of this, and it's way beyond just the fire department. Your county may or may not have an emergency management coordinator, and you may or may not even have a relationship with your emergency management coordinator. And then when you start compounding things like national pandemic and national efforts and national vaccines and national pushes, you get accidentally roped into something that, quite frankly, doesn't fall into the pay scale of being a volunteer fire chief. And there's discussions there, and there's an opinion that you have to give sometimes. And basically, what I would recommend is take your personal bias out of the way, and I would say just go with whatever your local doctors / national leaders / CDC rep or governor, or finds, unless you're a virologist that's a head of a volunteer fire department, then kudos to you, because you are a special
they're everywhere.
Person. But outside of that, no matter what our opinions are of it now, every single one of us was looking at our CDC and our state health associations and agencies, and to a certain extent your governor, for some sort of recommendation on this is what we're doing. And as that unfolds, and it trickles downhill, pretty much doesn't matter if you're in a borough or a county or a district or whatever, you're going to have someone that's sitting in some sort of politically appointed position that, guess what, they're not a virologist either. And the same thing, they're going to be having to make a decision. And arguably, you need to be one of the first people to sit there and reinforce that decision. And it makes it a challenge because, again, what are we actually going to know about how to handle a national response to a pandemic flu?
I remember the swine flu. I don't remember specifically what year it was, but I remember that there was no national deal. There was no guidance. It was the same thing on Monday as what happened on Tuesday. We didn't have really any guidance of any kind back then. And the fact that there was something, to kind of steer you into a direction and some idea of what to do, that was kind of helpful. I mean, fortunately, I don't know anybody that ever got the swine flu. I don't know anyone, but I know lots of people that got COVID, so I would say this one was potentially much worse. Just by the raw numbers of people affected and deaths and so forth. But there was more help. There was more knowledge and more information given out. I remember back then the scariest thing that ever happened is I had a guy walk in with multiple resistant tuberculosis, and I thought that was the end of the world. Like I thought we were all going to die from that, because there's nothing to do for it. But have TB, you get the consumption, and there was definitely more help and more knowledge, even though as for us here, our primary response is, we're fire. We do medical and we do respond to that stuff, but that's not our bread and butter, so to speak, here.
Yeah, I can say that from a lot of the, I don't want to say off the cuff decisions because they were thought about and discussed in length, but a lot of it was stuff that we just had to come up with policies on our own. Because there wasn't, again, everyone was doing something similar, maybe a little different across the U.S. Paid volunteer, everyone was getting whacked over the head with this. And I think, and this is true for almost any scenario, situation, problem, issue, and it doesn't matter what it is. It's not just COVID. It could be political. It could be pedantic, whatever. Is always do what's right by the organization and what's right by the community. And at the end of the day, the community has a basic expectation that the fire department or EMS service is going to show up and do something.
Yeah, no matter what it is.
Yeah, no matter what.
Yeah, if there's a job out there that nobody does, guess what? It's the fire departments, and it doesn't matter where you are or what it is. That's just the adage that goes with it.
So you've got to figure out something that crosses the third proverbial box. Will the membership go along with it, accept it? So if you're physically able to come up with something that is right by the organization, that is right by the citizens that are funding your organization, and your membership will do it, I really recommend that path, because you're pretty much going to be on like first ballot sainthood Vatican nomination cards right there.
In the volunteer versus that paid world, that you're asking somebody to do something, that role, that leadership role, is a little bit different, and you handle it a little bit different than you do if you're the chief of St. Louis or whatever, because you're literally asking these people to do these things. It's not I'm dictating because I'm your boss. It's there's a certain level of respect and all that goes with that makes that happen, and it's not always framed as a question or a request. Sometimes it's framed as an order and a deal, but you get down to the brass tacks of it, you're asking these people to do these things.
Sure. Well, or you can get on the other side of that, where you look at what's happening with the nurses, doctors, hospital workers, where they were basically baby seal clubbed into being forced to work. And now you're in the juxtaposition and the irony of forcing them to get the vaccinations while you were forcing them to work, which is, at the bare minimum, unique. And I think a lot of that, that in itself is another podcast, is how to actually get people to do what you want versus what you need.
Well, yeah, and how to get people to do what you need and what you want, and get them to do it willingly. That's a whole nother big part of that. It's not, I promise you, and just from my experience at it, that the volunteer fire chief that comes in and slams stuff around and yells at everybody doesn't say chief that long. Like, that guy gets removed. He can get by with it once or twice or here and there, but he's not going to last long if that's his standard mode of operation. Like there's just no way that people want to put up with that. And I'm not at all saying that there's not a time and a place to be angry, mad, dictatorial, or any of those things, because there is. There's times to just lay the law, and that's what it is. But it can't just be every sentence that comes out of your mouth.
Right. Well, I mean, again, recommendation from the armchair. Chief's job is not to make the popular decision. The chief's job is to make the right decision. And if you were ruling from the prospect of popularity and what's going to be the most favorable action, that is not your job title.
Yeah, no, you'll fail.
Now, you are strictly there, you are truly there to make the decision when it's not popular. It's the right decision, but it's not popular. And we definitely have a whole series of podcasts dedicated to personal stories of mine of just getting torched on making bad decisions because they were personal and not making them in the absolute best interest of the organization. And that's hard because, frankly, you're going to be friends with everyone eventually.
Just the fact of making a decision, you're a young guy coming up. That struggle to make that decision is one of the biggest hurdles that you've got to cross. Is just to make a decision and own it as yours, right, wrong, or indifferent, and then deal with the consequences on the other side. I mean, that's kind of a learned skill set that a guy's got to pick up somewhere along the way.
Sure, and the ability to eat humble pie. I screw up, you screw up, we all screw up. If you screw up, don't sit there and make an excuse. It is 1,000 times more beneficial to everyone to physically go there and actually just say, oh, chalk this one up in a loss. This is why. Sorry, and move on. Won't happen again because people appreciate humility.
Yeah, for sure. Back to our other conversation, that that whole time and that transpiring of COVID, and like I said before, I think we're still neck deep in part of it, but it's a humbling experience on a lot of fronts because you not only learned some of your limitations of your department, your fellow members, and some of that stuff, but you figured out other ways to do the things that you're used to doing every day, and just that moving through that whole process makes you a better person and a better firefighter, better chief, better. There was a lot of opportunity to learn there.
Yeah, more opportunities than probably realized even.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, in our area, there was so much uniqueness to it, because again, there's no one to fall back onto, and our organization's even old enough to be able to go back and theoretically talk to someone from the 1917 Spanish flu. They died a long time ago, but again, our organization's that old, so there's no references. You're not getting any answers from any of the agencies. There's no real guidelines right out of the gate. And there's some of it where you just have to wing it into what's best for the community and what's best for the membership. And whenever they do print the guidelines, yeah, we'll take a look at them. Probably adopt about 99.99% of it. But some of it you're just going to have to come off the cuff with. And there's no difference between that and stumbling and getting toned into an anomaly on an emergency scene. You have a complete curveball thrown at you at an emergency scene. It's the same concept. It's adapt and overcome. So your organization's very familiar with this ideology. Then keep talking about COVID. And another factor that's kind of unique is the fact that we are a city department, even though we're volunteer, and you have city management kind of asking you what your game plan is for this. And short of standing in the corner of the room and rocking back and forth in your big red clown shoes, trying to come up with something, you know, make verbs, adjectives, string them together, try and sound smart, confident at least, and then see what the city has any recommendations on. In our area, our city, again, city and county closed down, I want to say a week before the national closure.
Yeah.
It may have been 2 weeks because I want to say the county did it, and then a few days later, the city followed suit. And that kind of caused a whole bunch of confusion and anger throughout the community because shortly after that, then the state had its closure. And so you had businesses that had been closed for 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, it turns into a month and a half.
Right. And then you have to deal with public sentiment on scene. And I always kind of giggled when you'd have someone give you a comment about why are you wearing masks or on. And then, you're like, well, if you only knew that this was the 12th person that I've seen today with COVID and it's 10 a.m., you wouldn't be asking that question.
You'd ask me to put another one on.
Yeah.
We did all those things and still do a large portion of all that, as things have evolved. And, of course, we're back to having training and doing the things that really need to happen to make the department. We've got the group trainings again. We've got all that pretty much back to normal. But we're never going to get rid of some of the PPE requirements, some of the other protocols that go along with the medical side of things. That stuff's going to hang around for years, maybe decades.
Sure, and from a departmental point of view and preparation for this, everyone remembers KN95 mask shortage and the M95 mask shortage, and then you couldn't find rubbing alcohol or Lysol or bleach or anything else. And what I'd really recommend is just taking a simple trip at least once a year to a grocery store and just buying, what cleaning products you need, put them in a box, get some extra stuff, 1,000 pair of gloves, 500 masks, at least 10, 15 gowns, some face shields, whatever. Put it in a box and do that for 5 years in a row. And then after that, keep buying one every year.
Yeah, just hold on to it.
And just hold on to it so that way you don't get uppercutted by some sort of whatever the next emergency is. Because having equipment like that versus needing equipment like that is two different things. And we can talk about death rates and everything off of COVID, and everyone knows that there's things out there that are 10 times worse and 1,000 times worse than COVID. That if you ever had a major release of some sort of African hemorrhagic fever, you'd want a glove.
Yeah, we're going to have to definitely do a better job with that. I would say that what we did is not good enough for anything like that. So we wouldn't have made it.
No, I think that'd have been a little more of a challenge for everyone else.
And I just want to say, Matt and I, neither one are telling you what to do, what to, be a vaxxer, anti-vaxxer. That's not what this is about.
Yeah, it's a personal experience. If God forbid, if we have just the slightest hint of a recommendation that you maybe ought to consider and be like, well, those two retards, they ought to do 10 times better job, but they're almost right about mentioning this one thing, that's okay. then I would argue this thing was a success, because one of the bigger problems that we have out there is just a complete lack of bouncing ideas and considering other options to how to run an organization. And what's going to be applicable in Texas isn't going to be applicable in Minnesota or Boston or Nome, Alaska.
Yeah, for sure. Completely different world, completely different scenarios. Uh, what fits one doesn't fit the other always. There's commonalities and there's things that kind of go along with everything, but the basic function that you've got to be in tune with your response area, with your department, with your city, with your local government, and so on, so that you understand what's the right thing for where you are and who you are, and your response is equal to those needs. That's the important part.
Yeah, it still comes down to, are you meeting the standard for your community? Are you meeting the standard for your membership? And are you doing the right thing per your vision of the organization? And if you're checking all three of them boxes, you ought to be just fine.
Yep, you can roll right past those little hiccups. That's it. Hey, thanks for listening.
Appreciate it.
I hope it was at least entertaining, if not informative, maybe a little bit on that.
And we had to get our first COVID podcast out of the way.
Yeah, now we don't have to do that anymore.
Everyone's talking about COVID. You got to talk about COVID. Yeah. You don't have a choice.
Yeah, we're done with that one. We don't have to do that again.
Some of the other topics that we'll be kind of talking about in the future is not necessarily the commitment to volunteerism, because, I mean, that's obviously kind of what we are, but how to sustain that commitment to volunteerism, our approaches to it, how to build, grow, and develop your organization. Definitely some politics. No name calling here. It's just kind of a general life experience, personal experience.
And observations.
And you won't see too much of like an armchair quarterbacking tactics discussion here, because frankly, I truly look at tactics as something that's absolutely regional, because it's based on building construction and ultimately what sort of tools and equipment you have, the level of training that your membership has. And I'm just not a big fan of sitting there telling you that you have to only do it this way, because it's just, well, frankly, that's how you're going to kill everyone.
Well, and you have part of the information, or they had part of the information, and you have all the information post haste. It's not really a fair thing to just beat people up over that. I mean, that's that. I'm a big believer in that post incident review and some of that, but I don't believe that it should just become a clubbing, and it's not that you did all this wrong. It's, we need to focus on what went right more than the wrong, and I don't think there's a lot to add on some of those scenarios where you're armchair quarterback and stuff.
I think another thing that I know we're going to be talking a lot about this is our organization itself and what we're specifically doing to better enhance our organization in all aspects. Recruiting, retention, policies, SOPs, development, rookie schools, officer development, and not necessarily just give a checklist update, but kind of take general discussion points and talk about how we're applying it to our organization. And then ultimately, it'd be great to kind of give real basic updates on the stuff that were failures, why we think they were failures or completely unknown, and ultimately also give the critiques and updates on the things that went positive in the direction that we're trying to go.
Yeah, because the idea is to think a little bit outside of that box, because I think the box is what's got a lot of organizations in a pickle that they're in now, where they're behind on manpower, behind on equipment, behind on training, behind on all these things that are important.
Yeah, funding, politics, interdepartment relationships, MOUs, you know, the relationship with your city, the relationship with your county, relationship with organizations that have nothing to do with fire, but they're still public safety oriented, police, sheriff, EMS agencies, and on and on. And these are all things that are going to be critical to our organization and building it.
And when you get out of that box, you don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work. Some of that stuff's going to just fall flat on its face. But we know what's in the box and how it works, and we know that we want things to be better than what's in that box. So what choice do you have but to get out of the box a little bit and just give it a shot and see what happens?
I think they're probably at the end of this, won't be on this podcast because we haven't even gotten that far yet. But I think what we'll do is we'll probably create a general email. And if anyone wants to send us a fantastic critique or tell us how awesome we are, we'll be more than happy to provide you that opportunity.
Yeah, and you can always leave a review and tell us how terrible it actually is.
Yeah,
So,
or wrong.
yeah,
Don't
or wrong.
forget that part,
Yeah.
because we're wrong often
Yeah.
and continually.
Well said. So with that, thanks for listening. Glad you tuned in. We'll see you next time.
Have a good evening.